Go to TAPgiles.com to learn dreams, engage my services, and support the channel. So I made this demo of how to pause objects. So it was there was a game that was shown on a community stream where they have a pause menu, and then the characters in the background all paused as well. So if I hold R2, I can now still move around, but everything's paused. And then if I let go, they're all moving in the same exact physical way. So if you imagine this curve, then I pause, that should keep on moving around like that. It should rotate forwards so that it matches that. And it all does. And this is just on a timeline, so it just pauses the timeline. So I'll start with the timeline example first, because that's very easy. So if you have a timeline, you can just animate something. There are tutorials in the game for you to check out to figure out how to do that. So there you go, and we put it onto a loop, and now it's going to move up and down infinitely. But to pause this, you can set the playback speed to 0 and then reset it to 100% when you want it to play. So I'm going to have a central chip, and all it does is tells things when it's meant to be paused. So I'm going to have this on R2, which means I can still move around quite freely without messing anything up. I'll have it remote controllable, and if R2 is more than some amount, then we'll send a signal through a receiver that's just scene wide, and we'll have an object in the scene, a transmitter, which basically transmitters and receivers can just talk to each other. It doesn't mean that a receiver can't send, it can only receive, but it can receive and send. So give this a name and use the D-pad on here to get to that. So now, while we're paused, we'll set this playback speed to 0 with a keyframe. So I'll pull R2 and then it sends a signal to pause, and that's very easy for a timeline. The other most common case where this would be useful is for physical objects and kind of pausing them in midair and things like that. So let's make I tend to make a cone shape, because as it twists and rotates around in the air, it's quite easy to see, as opposed to a sphere, which doesn't look any different at any point in time. Now this will have some logic on it, so we'll have a chip, and I'll just surface snap it like that. So we also want to know if we're paused. Right, so think about what we want to do when we pause. We want it to not move first, so let's just use a keyframe. So it should be movable first, and then we set it to non-movable. So let's just see if that works. So I pull R2 and it pauses, and then it continues. But you see how it's kind of slower to get going when it's stationary, and it gets faster. That's just how physics works. If you pause it in midair and then unpause it, it will have that slower start again. So we really want to get it moving with the same speed and everything that it had before. Also, if we start it off with some speed, I'll just use a mover at the start of a timeline. Okay, and now if we try that and pause it and let go, it's just going to drop like a stone, because it doesn't remember what speed it was going and things. So we need to know what speed it's currently going. You can get that from a movement sensor. So a movement sensor has these velocity outputs, and they send the signals for how fast it's moving in those different axes. I want to condense all this down into a single fat wire, which is lots of values in one thing, and then freeze that wire. So first let's turn this into, instead of lots of separate values, we'll put this into a combiner in 3 numbers, because we have 3 numbers. Like that. And now we have this single wire that contains all that stuff. And if we put that into a signal manipulator, you can have a look, and we'll use a splitter on the other side so I can show you exactly what's going on there. So we're getting this data as to the velocity it's moving, and it's quite constant in the X and the Z, but the Y is changing a lot because it's going up and down. Cool. So now this signal manipulator has a freeze output. So this output that we're seeing on the side, if we play and I freeze it, now all of those are locked in and it won't change until I turn that off, and then it's live again. So we want to do that when we pause. So in this keyframe, we'll freeze. So R2, and now it's frozen, and I let go, and then it's live again. Now we want to, when we come out of pausing, we want to make it move in the same way it was moving before, which we've got stored in here. So we don't need that, we need a mover, an advanced mover, and we'll split this value as we did before, and we get the same from the same, so X, and then X goes into X, Y goes into there, and then Y goes into Y, Z, like that. We need to also make sure that these are all 1 meter per second, and that's what this outputs. So this will multiply whatever internal stuff this has got going on by 1 meter, and it will make it work better, make it work accurately. So there, and then when do we want that to happen? We want that to happen when the paused goes from on to off, because then we want it to instantly set the speed. That's why we set the strength to 100%, and you don't really care about damping stuff. Strength to 100%, that means it's going to set it to whatever these values are, set the velocity. So when let's use a signal manipulator, and in the custom remapper mode we have this pulse it off. So when this goes from paused to not paused, this will send a pulse. So we want to pulse that on when we unpause. We also want to keep this frozen in that moment, because if this unfreezes, then it will become live, and then this will use the live data, which will be, it won't be moving yet. So we need to keep that paused while this is on, and then it will become off again, because the pulse is just on off kind of immediately. So instead of using a keyframe to affect that, we just wire the pause straight into freeze and use the pulse also to freeze, and now it's perfectly restoring the speed. Like that. Okay, so now we want to do the rotation as well, so let's add a bit of rotation in here to test with. Just pirouetting through the air, cool. And then we want to store the same kind of stuff. So instead of storing this positional, directional thing going on, we'll combine it and again into a transform. So a transform has a position which is the same kind of format as this 3-number combiner, and an orientation, which is basically a rotation. So we'll get a rotation sensor over here. And that has similar things for the angular velocity and the different axes. So let's just use the same order. That should be fine. Wire that into the rotation, that into the position, and then freeze that. And now we need another step in here, because now we've got this transform. And then we need to take the position from that to do this restoration part. And then we need to split the rotation part and use an advanced rotator and do the same thing. And we don't need this X thing, this modulate anymore. We need to set it to the plug, because there's no scaling of this object or something that can affect it. So we need the plug thing with L1 and X to change these, and now this just sets this value. And full speed, no damping. We need it powered at the same time. Oh, this needs to be a rotation type, this combiner over here, otherwise we're taking it out as a rotation type. So let's try that. And it keeps the rotation. Just like that. So now we don't need that to set it up. and the rest is fine. And now we can emit this and just have it keep on emitting these objects. And we can give it a launch angle, give it some rotational speed, make it emit more often, and they all pause and restore their speed and rotation perfectly. Like that. Oh yeah, we need to make it not only emit while it's not paused. But apart from that, so when I pause, now it's not going to spit out new ones. But yeah, that whole thing works pretty well. If I have a puppet, it should just work the same for a puppet. Or if I just do that, that needs to set this to non-movable. So it is working fine. So you can effectively just surface snap this chip onto something and then make this keyframe affect the movable setting. Let's just go over some things that you won't be able to pause very easily. So if you have a block and this moves it up there, and it has some slow power up, and it's activated by some piece of logic. There's no way of like pausing it midway through this transition, because if you turn it off, then it's just going to turn off. If you have like heap changes, you can kind of do it, but that will affect the speed of it moving. Like if I made this speed really slow and then turned keyframe heap changes off, that's a lot slower. So you can't really do anything with this kind of stuff. Stuff that is live, you can't kind of store and restore how far through this it was that was going on. Same with similar things in here with output smoothing. You can have the same effect, but there's no way of like pausing that output smoothing. So you'd have to do this kind of animation in a different way. Same for, there's the springiness. So it kind of springs like that, which is cool, but there's no way of pausing that springiness. It's like on or off. And within a puppet, so the cool thing about puppets is, depending on if they're moving up or down in the air and how they're moving relative to the ground and stuff, they kind of procedurally animate and like with the legs, and they also have these poses, like this is the pose for the run to make it look a bit different, only while it's running. So these things would also have to be countered in some way if you wanted to do a full puppet and have it working seamlessly. On the other hand, if you have like a pause menu up anyway, or if you can't actually see the scene, then just making it not movable and turning off any movers and stuff will probably suffice. So you can do that kind of stuff. You just have to build it from the start in such a way that you can pause it. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something interesting. Go to patreon.com/TAPgiles to learn something new every day.